Hi everyone, welcome to the Tech Talks of FTech, the technology side of FARFETCH. Thank you for joining us today on this talk to know more about infrastructure at FARFETCH, Escalating CI and CD. It's a pleasure to be with you today, even virtually. For now, we'll keep our Tech Talks virtual, but soon we expect to open our doors to you and to host the next talks in our offices. I'm Pedro, the communication responsible for the FTech, and I'll be with you during this talk as the host. We are going to spend the next hour with Cristiano Cunha. Just to introduce Cristiano a little bit, Cristiano is the cloud automation team manager at FARFETCH. He is passionate about automation and delivery process improvement. He started his career as a developer, evolved to be a tester, and is now working in the infrastructure area. His career path has been on both sides of the trenches, provided him with a unique view of the process and the challenges it puts forward. Having worked in startups as well as in multinational corporations, he has closely followed the delivery process evolution and the growing importance of the delivery automation and how to escalate such systems. Before I hand over to him, I just want you to tell that if you have any questions about the presentation or some doubts about infrastructure at FARFETCH, you could put your question in the Q&A panel or like other questions. I will collect all of them and we try to answer as much as we can at the end of today's session. Once again, thank you for joining us. And now I pass the ball to Cristiano. Welcome, Cristiano. It's a pleasure to have you here in the Tech Talks.
Thank you, Pedro. So thank you for your presentation. As Pedro said, my name is Cristiano Cunha. He did a great job introducing myself. Just want to add some details and flavors about that. So my romance with FARFETCH started a while ago. I actually was one of the first testers of FARFETCH, and I helped all of this path regarding test automation and now continuous delivery, continuous integration. And these both worlds touch and make sense to me career-wise, and it's at the end of the day what motivates me. So thank you for having me here. Thank you everyone to be here to hear about this path we undergo regarding escalating CI/CD in FARFETCH. So I actually had prepared a slide presenting myself, but it's already done. If you want to get in touch with me, please do so via the link that is there. So to take you down this journey regarding escalating continuous integration and continuous deployment in FARFETCH, I want to give you a brief context about everything that we have done in FARFETCH regarding growth of persons, growth of technologies and complexity, touching the tooling evolution that makes sense also and that will match also the pipeline evolution we had through the times. Touch base the first version of pipelines to understand what were the challenges and why we did evolve and why we had a first version of pipelines. Understanding and going a little bit deeper regarding the blueprint concepts that we put together here in FARFETCH, and take a look at the next step, the next stage regarding pipeline evolution. Without further ado, let's look at the evolution we had in FARFETCH. So FARFETCH, it's a company that started a while ago. I still remember being 30, 40 persons, and that was all of the FARFETCH that existed, included all of the departments. Nowadays, that's not a reality anymore. Only, so looking at the development team, we are more than 1,000 developers already. These developers are divided into different countries, different regions, in different teams, and that they are producing more than 500 services that are composed and interconnecting to create the platform of FARFETCH is today. To put this into production, we are also building more than 20,000 builds per month of all of these microservices into production. That roughly means that we are around 5,000 deploys per month. And of course, to reach these numbers, we cannot do it manually. We need to have a process to take the code into production in a reliable and sustainable way with the performance that the teams need and that our clients require. So this is the evolution a little bit about human and complexity. But how does it make sense also looking at the tools we are using? So far in the past, starting 2010, the world was really pretty simple. So a couple of Windows services using .NET Framework applications connecting to SQL Server. We had delivery made basically by hand, so nothing too much automated at the time. We don't have a high number of services. And it was working for the time, and it started our progression exactly there. But with the growth of services, they need also to start to diversify. And they started to introduce new tools and new technologies to be used. And that triggers the necessity of having the definition of a pipeline that allows us to take that into production. And in FARFETCH, we always believe that we will build a solution that makes more sense for the users. And at this point, the users are the development teams. So at this point that we were basically a Microsoft shop, it makes sense to adopt these kind of tools that will match exactly the necessities that we had at the time. So the first version of pipelines was using Jenkins, SimCity, Octopus Deploy, and Proget. And we built it exactly to tackle the first challenges we had in this path of taking forward all of the things that we needed to put into production. Of course, the applications evolved and have other type of necessities and start using other type of technologies that needs to be also supported within the pipeline to be able to be used until production. And this is not only an evolution regarding applications, but it's also an evolution regarding the infrastructure. So the infrastructure started to be cloud-based. We started looking at Ansible as our scripting tool and start having Active Directory, and we start our path also towards automation and towards everything that we have to do to support the increasing growth of the development teams and the increasing complexity of our platform. And in here, I just want to let you check what was the first version of pipelines. So the first version of pipelines we put together were really something that we identify to solve some of the problems at the time. But it still was something that was built manually. So all of the construction of the pipeline was built manually. So the definition of steps and how they interact with each other was a manual configuration at the time. We didn't have any automation to handle all of the tooling and infrastructure we have underneath. And one example is anytime we need to increase the pool of slaves that are executing the pipelines, we needed to do by hand, and the configuration of such things are complex and not always producing the same results. So it's a big over work that we need to do to have that working. And also having this kind of pipelines centralized in two teams at the time, that was the release team and the automation team, will make any change that the teams will require to the pipelines to be issued via tickets on those teams. That means that the teams will not have the autonomy they desire. And if the central teams didn't have the necessary bandwidth to cope with that in the rightful amount of time, it will take time. And because of all of this, it was hard to maintain. So a lot of manual work and a lot of investment from those two teams to cope with all of the necessities of the engineering teams. And we continue to evolve. So 2017 was basically a turning point here. We were, so the appearance of .NET Core make it possible to start thinking of migrating our services from Windows to Linux and to container-based applications. And this exactly started all of this revolution regarding our services and these transitions that make sense, and the necessity also to rethink the pipeline as we had in the past. We also added a lot of other things because the applications continue to grow, and the interaction between them also needed to be coped with new tooling like Kafka, Cassandra, and Mongo. And we started to create some standards. As the complexity of the platform also increases, we need to create some standards regarding logging, alerting, and there's also the introduction of Kibana, Prometheus, New Relic, and PagerDuty to solve all of those challenges we had at the time. And that, of course, continued, and infrastructure started to look at salt stack, looking at Terraform as ways of automating everything we had in infrastructure, and put automation first. And this was a big change in infrastructure. We stopped thinking as system administrators and start thinking as infrastructure engineers. And towards this change, a lot of investment in the right tooling was done also. And this continues forward, of course, with different tooling depending on the needs. So Console, Kubernetes was coming along, and Vault also is the thing that will keep our secrets. So, and around this time of .NET Core introduction, Salt Stack, Terraform, we started to have a necessity to refactor the pipelines we had at the time. And this brought the necessity of thinking about what we had and what we wanted to tackle. And with this, we came up with the blueprint concept. So the blueprint ends up to be a YAML file with metadata that will allow us to take any source that we have in the source control repo to production. It has the aspect that you see on your left side of the screen. It's just a series of metadata that we have there, but it has some key concepts that will change also the mentality behind how we handle everything that we do in FARFETCH. First of all, it will be the source of truth. So every service that is executed in FARFETCH will have a blueprint associated to it. And when I say everything, it's not only applications that are defined and developed by engineering teams, but also for infrastructure and all of the teams that want to put anything in production. So the step 0 is creating the blueprint that is the reflection of what we need to put in production. This ended up to be like a contract between infrastructure and every stakeholder that we have that is aligned between the two parts, and will allow us to hook all of the automation that infrastructure was doing to tackle the challenges of the inherent to a pipeline. So where to deploy it, how to deploy it, what are the validation that we will do, what kind of compilation and tooling that we need to have in the pipeline. And all of this is done via hooks for the infrastructure code that we have built also during this progression. If you are interested, we actually have a blog entry created by our VP of Infrastructure, Gaurav Gupta, and the link is right here, and it talks exactly about the language of infrastructure that is based on the blueprint, and he goes over it in a nice way, so check it if you can. But as this is such a groundbreaking concept, I'm going to go a little bit in more detail in each one of those sections. So the first one I want to highlight is the service catalog and build section, let's call it. And in here, as you can see, we have the definition of platform boundary name. This allows us also to rethink the way that we are organizing our applications in production, so towards the DNS that they are using and in the source repo. So doing a direct match with all of that and allowing us to create an automation that will put that all together working. In here, I just want to highlight two other things. So the maintainers area, where you have the list of users that are maintaining the application. And by maintainers, we understand the users that have access to the GitLab repo to do merge requests and code changes, access to development environments where the application is deployed, and that are the owners of the applications in production. This will allow autonomy to the teams, because in the past, when they wanted to have access to one environment, they need to request it they request that via ticket to the infrastructure team that will take that and do that permission by hand or via automation, but always via ticket. So with this, it will bring autonomy to the teams where they can add or remove users, and through the merge request of the blueprint, it will be automatically giving or removing permissions of that user, allowing the teams to have that control. Last thing, the tech type is also something really important. So tech type is, we have an example of it, .NET Core. That is what will allow the pipeline to have the right tooling to that type of technology that is being built on the pipeline. So the right kind of tooling to do the build, to do the validation, to do the testing, to do the packaging, and to do the deployment. So if it's a .NET application, it will have all of the .NET Core tooling and frameworks needed to put that until production. And we have different tech types depending on the technologies that are being used. And finally, the repository is not other than where can we find the code that we will take and start to compile to deliver to production. So this is the first part of the blueprint, really important one. The next one, it will allow us also to understand the intricate web of microservices that we have in a more concise way, in a more central way. Because in the past, what we had is to understand which application is calling which application. So if I have an application that calls an application A that calls an application B, I need to check several places to understand if that's the reality or not. With this, and this area is exactly to match that. So we have an area in the blueprint that will state the dependencies of the applications. And in there, we have the dependencies between applications, but also between my application and underneath applications that are served by infrastructure, like in this example, Kafka. And this allows also to create all of the connections needed, of course, and to have automation, for instance, for Kafka, to have automatic creation of topics, for instance, and execution of any script or preparing data that you need before deploying your application. And this is all done here with this section. It allows us also to do some tracebacks of what can happen in production. So if for some reason this particular topic is being hammered and we don't know what is the application that is using this topic, we can easily find out by consulting what is stated on the blueprint. So it allows us to have full understanding of how things are configured and interconnected between them. This is also true for databases. So if your application will use databases, they will also be stated here. And in here, it will abstract you of where the databases are present. And as the applications, we use the platform boundary name to identify the Cassandra cluster, the SQL server cluster that we have, and that the services will need to work in production. This will allow the configuration of the routing, so accesses to that database, and also any configuration of authentication and which kind of key space and services or tables will be used by the application. This will allow also any SQL scripts that needed to be executed prior or post deployment of the application. And again, this will enlighten us or bring some clarity on how many connections are being done to a certain type of database or cluster. And this also is something that will help also the database team to understand if they recurrently have requests of an increasing number of applications to a certain cluster. And as they are reviewing the merge requests, they will have that information and can proactively think in growing that cluster if needed, because they are a growing need from the applications, or the other way around, if no one is using it anymore, understanding that also via what happens in the blueprint. Next area I want to touch base is provisioning and deployment. So we had also feedback from the teams that they need to have an understanding of, or understanding and control, so autonomy towards the teams regarding how many containers they will have in production, how many CPUs it will be using, how many memory it will need. Not only defining that by in the beginning, but also having the ability that autonomously changing that with the necessity of a sales season or a problem in production that they will need to increase or decrease the instances they have. They can do it via the change of blueprints. And after submitting it, the changes will be automatically put it in production. The other important aspect of this part of the blueprint is the security context. As you know, a company like FARFETCH will have a lot of compliances that they need to adhere to. And some applications will need to be executed in some restricted environments with some predefined rules or with predefined validations. So in this case, if we have an application that is on the PCI security context, it will have a more restricted set of rules and a predefined validations that will be added to the pipeline. And this is all done via the definition of the blueprint. And of course, that will mean also that the teams will have now the responsibility to know exactly what is the purpose of my application, why it will be executed this way, how many CPUs, and understanding how it will be deployed, how all of those things that were abstracted in the past are now closer to the teams. And they have the autonomy and the responsibility to define what is better for their application on a given context, on a given moment. So it's also a change of responsibility that is happening here. Finally, the last bit of the pipelines that I want to highlight is regarding what we call observability. Sorry. So in the pipelines, we're missing one part that is alerting and alarmistic. So we did an effort to have those standards defined for logging and alarmistic and metrics. And this will provide the teams to be able to define their own alarms, their own metrics for their applications. So in this area, on the telemetry area, we are defining what are the contacts that will be invoked when an alarm is triggered. And in here, we have an email and a Slack that will be automatically pushed to the notifications to if an alert is happening, and also the possibilities for the teams to define exactly what are the kind of alarms that make sense for my application. So if I have an application that is just looking at CPU usage, I can put it here. But if I have a necessity that is more complex than that, I can define my own alarms and my own metrics and define it exactly what I want to do here. And as you can see, we have also active health checks and deep health checks, so the ping and pong that most of you should know, that are using upon deployment to understand if the application was deployed correctly and if the application have all of the dependencies working to be correctly deployed. So it's also an important part of the pipelines. So all of this is now centered in the pipelines, and this will allow the automatic creation of the pipelines. So by parsing all of that information that we have on the blueprints that are defined by the engineering teams, will allow us to automatically create the pipelines. And all of the steps that are here, even though the teams have some control over those, are automatically created and will allow them, by changing the blueprint, to change the aspects of the deployment. And as you can see, they can have parallel jobs. They can add some validations, because the validations will depend on the applications. And they will have all of this visible on the Jenkins. So we didn't change the Jenkins because we think it was worthwhile UI. The UI look that the new Jenkins, so the Blue Ocean one, is providing is way better than the last one. And because of that, we continue to invest in Jenkins, and we have defined the pipeline like this. And we have this view where we can have a view per stage of what is happening in each one of those, with the times it takes in each one of those, and to have also the teams looking at it and being able to produce suggestions and produce also contributions to make this better and better. And as you noticed, this is actually, let's say, virtually the second version of pipeline, so the second evolution we did in the pipelines. And this is always triggered by the necessity of our clients, that is the engineering team. And looking at this one is way better than the first version, as you can see, because everything is automated, everything is based on blueprints. But we still, and because of the teams that are also maturing on this CI/CD process, the teams are more and more requirements and want more and more autonomy. So we end up now looking at the future, and we know that now what we had it in the past, that was one pipeline that was automatically built via the blueprint. We are now breaking this into 3, and this is actually something that we are still developing, but it's the new path that I want to share with you just in the last bit of this presentation. So with all of this that I just talked to you about, the teams also have the necessity of having the full control over the build and test steps of the pipeline. And this is what we are calling declarative pipelines. And one thing that they cannot do on the last version that I just talked to you about, based on blueprints, and the blueprints concept is reused here, is, for instance, if I want to add a new technology to the bunch without using the central teams that are handling all of these pipelines. With the declarative pipelines, the teams will have that power, the power of using different base image to introduce new technologies, to define how I want to test, and to use new testing tools if needed in an autonomous way. And this is something that the teams were asking for some time. And this is exactly trying to provide what the teams are requesting, because it's, at the end of the day, a tool that they will use to put the code in production. But I'll also give that kind of autonomy and power and responsibility to the teams. We will need to have non-functional requirements that we need to continue to make sure we all adhere to. So we have security, compliance, and FARFETCH standards that we continue to need to comply with. So we introduced this middle area of the pipeline, NFRs, to make sure that all of those validations are still being included on everything we do. So we're giving a lot of autonomy and liberty on the declarative pipelines. We added a way to validate all of that through non-functional requirements. And the non-functional requirements is also built in a way that everyone can contribute. So if the security team has a new requirement that needs to be introduced, they can do it by themselves and ask for a code contribution to add to the pipelines. And last but not least, the deployment part. So we are looking at deployment in Kubernetes and taking advantage of all of the management of containers that will bring us. And we are leaning even to the auto-scaling part of things and preparing everything for that to be a reality in FARFETCH. So as you can see, the complexity of tooling that we have will make it hard to introduce new tools because of all of the needs that we have and the complex machine that we have. But we never shy of doing so if that tool will come and solve a problem within the challenge we have. And although we have now two different sets of pipelines, we are not pushing the teams to migrate to this new one. We believe that this solution, being the better in FARFETCH, will be voluntarily changed, volunteer change that the teams will do and come to this new pipeline because it offers what, at the end of the day, the teams are craving the most. That is more autonomy, more responsibility, and a clear path overview until the deployments. So thank you, everyone, for listening to me. This is my last slide. So now I believe that, Pedro, if you have any questions, it's the time for it.
Great presentation. Thank you so much, Cristiano. For now, we already have 4 questions to answer. So let's figure out if we have time for all of them. The first one is the question from Vanessa. What was the biggest challenge to adopt blueprints?
So, yeah, it's a good question because it was a change on everything that we did at the time. And the biggest challenge for me is the mentality change of having now to define and to think of my application in more than just producing a code to go to production, but understanding how it will be present and how it will be executed and how it reaches there, what kind of validations we need to do. So, and putting all that in context and mixing some of the concepts of infrastructure, engineering, performance, security, and bringing all that to a central tool. So I believe that was the biggest challenge, and also that will mean that the transition to that way of doing things is also a challenge, and to tackle that, we end up having some weekly sessions where we had the team that has implemented the blueprints available for anyone that has questions to migrate to that way of doing things.
Okay, and the second question is from Jose. Actually, Jose posted 2 questions. So the first one is the PCI security contest supported in production already?
Yes. Actually, the PCI security contest is already secured, ready to be used in production. It has been for some time. And it gives us some challenges, but yes, it's ready to be used in production.
And the second question from Jose is, what is the impact of defining platform boundary and name, and what implications arise from those names in the infrastructure?
So, I believe that naming is always the biggest challenge we have for us engineering. We have the original ones that will go with constellation names and the ones that want to describe all of the services in one sentence. And agreeing on all of that is really hard. So it has a huge impact to reorganize projects towards that. We had a lot of discussion regarding that. I don't believe we have the ideal solution or it's the final one. I believe it's something that we are building every day and adjusting as long as we are going. But I believe it's a good stepping stone to understanding the value of having such a thing. So being able to do that seamless understanding of if you have that division that is adhered to in the source code, in the DNSs, if in infrastructure, is something that is really valuable. And it also allows us to build all of the automation inherent to that regarding DNSs on one side and of infrastructure. Of course, it was not a migration in mass. So we always believe that we need time and we need to provide time for the development teams, because we all know that these changes are not the core of their responsibilities. They have a lot of features to deliver, and they still need to add value to production. So it was always a mix of slow migrations and slow changes that we needed to do, and always not migrating everything that we had in the past, but making sure that everything that is new will be born in the right way, and anything that changes from old to new will do those changes and making sure that everyone adheres to this new way of doing things.
Okay. Another question, this time from Jay. Do you have a ballpark idea of the effort invested to reach this level of maturity, sophistication? 5K days, 10K days, 20K days? What do you think?
Ooh, that's seems
question.
like a data kind of question. No, I don't have slightest idea on how much time it will take, because it's also nothing that it's not something that you put towards and you say, okay, this is the solution I need to go to, and let's see how much time the time to get there. Because at the end of the day, as we are walking towards that solution is shifting also. So it ends up to be, I believe, that is always a continuous investment on adapting and reacting to what the company needs, what the teams in the company needs, what the market is asking, and everything combined helps us understand what is the next thing or what we need to tackle. So I don't know if it's something I can put in a box and say it's this amount of days and go, and if you invest this time, you will reach here, because it's also depending on how well also the teams that you have will adhere to these things. How are they regarding maturity for all of these processes, and the maturity of willing to change to adhere to these things. So it's a known answer, but it's the one I can have for this moment.
We are full of questions now. The next question is from Vanessa Souza. How do you manage all the different pipelines and the migrations to one another?
So yeah, exactly. So the strategy, like I just said, is not forcing everyone to migrate to the next version of the pipelines we have, but giving the time to the teams to adapt and to see when is their best time to adhere to these new pipelines. Of course, this looking at the theory of things, it will be way better for us to have everyone migrating to the next version and doing this all of the time, because it will not need to have this support of the old ones and the new ones and the intermediate ones. So, but we really believe that we need to put forward a solution that by itself will sell to the teams, and they will understand that if that's the better solution that we are putting forward, they will automatically choose it and invest on it because they will see the benefits of such a solution. The other way around, if you force the teams and force the solution that we are putting forward, it will create probably a negative effect to the teams, and the adoption will not be that valuable. So although it will create a burden of support and that we need to follow and making sure that things are going, but I believe that at the moment it also pushes us to do the best solution that we can and always question what we are putting forward. So at the moment, the way we are doing things is putting forward the solution we believe is the better and giving time to the teams to do the migration while we are maintaining both of the things working, of course.
Okay. So I will put you just two more questions.
Okay.
One from Luis Tiana. Is load stress testing part of the pipeline? If so, could you share the key concepts of how it works?
So performance testing and load testing are always a tricky things regarding pipelines, because what we want is a pipeline that is fast enough to do the validations we need to do, but to take things into production. So actually we are doing some performance tests, and the teams are responsible by it, and they are just doing validations regarding performance of their applications in a way that is possible to introduce at this time on the pipelines. The other part of performance testing is handled outside of the pipeline, so they have other executions of load and performance tests of their applications outside of the pipeline. What we have on the pipeline is more of understanding if the next version is better or not of the last, regarding the performance requirements that the team is putting forward. And doing that validation is fast enough to be included on the pipeline. So in a way, we are doing both. One on the load testing, more addressed by the teams outside of the pipeline, and the validation that at least we are not worse than the last iteration doing in the pipeline. So it's a yes and no answer on this one.
Okay. And the last question, I think it's about a critical topic for us, so I think it's important to put this question. It's from Sergio Nunes. Regarding the topic of security and compliance, how do you handle user permissions across an automated pipeline? For instance, how you ensure that user contributing into the code base has permissions to deploy that is to production.
So actually, we started with a simple version of maintainers, where we had just maintainers. And those maintainers were the ones that will have the ability to trigger the pipeline and the ability to trigger a deployment of that pipeline. And now we have the necessity, and we are tackling exactly that, to have more detailed permissions. So separating the permission of deployment, separation of the permission of access, of development, of production, is being tackled at the time. But for now, we have the ability to define that on the maintainers list. So the maintainers list will tell you exactly what are the users that are available to go to the pipeline and trigger all of those deployments. Of course, the deployments are subject to other type of validations. So we have control over if it's to a determined security context, it will be approved by someone that is defined on that pipeline that will need to be to validate that deployment. So depending on the context, the pipeline has some mechanisms that will allow some extra validations. But at the end of the day, if the team is working on the application, we believe that the team is owning that application from start to end and is the best. And the elements of that team are the best persons that will know if we can or not do the deployment and when and all of those questions. So at the end of the day, we believe that the team present on the maintainers list that is maintained by the team, so they know which are the elements that are in the team that will have those kind of permissions, is exactly done on that fashion.
Okay, thank you so much, Christian. That is, I don't know if you have some final words.
No, I believe that's it. Thank you for having me here.
You have a lot of good feedback in the chat, so congrats for your presentation, and thank you for joining.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
And that's it. Thank you all for your time. Stay tuned for the next FARFETCH Tech Talks in February. I think we will talk about data governance. So stay tuned, and we publish in our social network. So that's it. Thank you so much. Bye bye. Have a nice day. Bye bye, Cristiano.
Bye, everyone. Stay safe.